Okay, so anytime we have anybody that we're having do a military press, we expect them to be able to go through this sequence. This is something that leads up to that. Anybody that's not able to do overhead press and military press, this is one of our ways to integrate that military press down into some of the stuff we're doing on the ground so that we get some carryover from our ground-based work to our actual skill, which we're considering the military press. So from here, what we're going to do, we're going to start out in prone. Couple reasons. One, prone essentially sets up a thoracic spine that we can press off of, allows the scapula to communicate with that thoracic spine as well as the arms. Plus, developmentally, from a prone position, that's where we start to establish all of our pushing strength progression from the neurodevelopmental strength progression. So what we're going to do here, we're just going to set up in a nice prone position. And you can automatically see how we have somebody here who has flat scapulas. If you put somebody down in prone, and you're already seeing two sharks swimming next to each other, we've got some bigger issues that we need to take care of. So if we can't get good scapular position here in prone, we don't need to go through the rest of this progression. We need to backtrack a little bit and tease out some soft tissue problems, probably, as well as some potential mobility issues. All we're going to do here, our entry level into this, is getting the hands, elbows tight, hands set up right in front of the shoulders, and all we're going to do is push back into the toes. We need to make sure the toes are dorsiflexed. All we're doing here is we're generating some tension and having to keep everything locked out nice and tight here. And that's all it is. For a lot of people, this will be an issue. We don't want to see a lot of movement here. We want to keep this nice and flat. We really shouldn't see any change in anything except right at the shoulders, a little bit of gliding in the scapula, and a little bit of change in what's going on down at the ankle. Then from here, what we're going to do, we're going to add a little bit more strength into this, a little bit more tension. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to push back into our toes, but come up onto your elbows. Good? And then come back forward. And again, push back and come up. And you notice nothing is changing here. What we don't want to get is what I refer to as middle school boy back, where we get a nice little rounding of this lumbar spine. Anytime we see a rounding of that lumbar spine, that tells us we've lost some stability. Good, go ahead and relax for a second. Once we've gotten that down where they can generate enough tension to lift themselves up off the ground, what we're going to do, I'm going to lift your feet up real quick. We're going to put a towel underneath the toes, you can go down, so that we can start to enter into a little bit more movement here. We're going to do the exact same thing. Push back, come up onto your elbows. Now, push back into your feet a little bit. And now we have our press. You go ahead and pull yourself forward. Good, and go back down to the ground. Good, and come back up, and press back, and pull yourself forward. There we go, and back down. And the towel's not sliding too well. But what we're getting here is we're essentially getting that push-pull, where again, that lumbar spine's having to stay nice and stable and give us a firm base to operate off of in our thoracic spine and our scapula. During the developmental sequence, more often than not, you don't see babies go from prone up to quadruped through the plank. What we typically see is a pushback into quadruped. So go ahead and widen your feet out just a little bit. Keep your knees on the ground. There's a wire right above your shoulders. Now what I want you to do, keep this nice and still. Push back just like we did, but let your hips come up and lead the way into quadruped. Good. And then come up onto your hands and shift forward. Good. And then shift your hips back and come down underneath that wire. Again, notice this whole time we're keeping the lumbar spine nice and stable. One more time, push back, hips up. Now this time walk your hands back underneath your shoulders. Good. And now walk your hands forward and shift all the way back down. Good. And then the last thing we can do while we're here is we've done a lot of stuff and we've worked on the bottom position of our pressing and our pull-ups. Now what we can do is we can kind of look at how that top position looks like. So go ahead and push back into quadruped. Keep your hands where they are. Push your hips all the way back as far as you can and drop those shoulders as far to the ground as you can. And we can start to look again at our overhead position with this. We've already cleared the overhead position with some of our overhead mobility stuff, but now we can start to look at it again to see if they have that overhead position. Also, as we're looking at this, we can kind of start to get a clear picture of what their overhead squat's going to look like just from a mobility standpoint. Not saying this is an overhead squat, but we can start to have that discussion at a later point in time.